Okay, so here I have my king-size bed. It's an earthing bed with an earthing bed sheet. That means that the mattress itself is laced with silver wire, as well as the bed sheet, the bottom sheet, the fitted bottom sheet that comes with the mattress. And it has connections on both. At the moment I'm connecting the sheet to a grounding rod outside via a single wire, not the mattress, but I don't think it really matters because they butt up against each other, and so ground one and the other ends up being grounded as well, I would imagine. Okay, and then here is my circuit with its two contacts. Two 4/9 fine silver commodity discs, or rounds. They call them commodity discs. The QR code on there. It gives you the website and the price of silver and the price of the commodity disc, because you have to add, manufacturing cost. Anyway, 6.6 giga ohms of resistance and one AA battery, resulting in something slightly around or slightly above 200 picoamps and something slightly less than 1.5 or 1.6 volts DC continuous current. Now, I believe the problem in the continuous use of this for long periods of time, the problem is current in all cases, and that's why I went to the trouble of putting in so much resistance. But I hate routine labor, and so I never bothered to make anything more containing more resistance than this, namely less amperage. But when I used to use nano-oriented circuits, nano amperage, just having like 10 or 100 mega ohms of resistance, which was a single resistor, it was easy to put together. But it didn't give me the bliss that this gives me, which shows that it's the amperage that's getting in the way. Well, there's one further step to take. In any of these circuits, regardless, to a certain degree, regardless of what internal resistance you put in the circuit, you want to put maximum, but there's one further step I'm realizing, and that is the need to short the circuit. And I need to state this as many times as necessary to get it drummed into both my head and yours. The importance of shorting out the application of this circuit. Now, I could just short out the circuit and leave it at that, but I'm afraid I would undermine the value of the short. In other words, if I just short out the two leads as they come out of the circuit, the position of the voltage gradient is going to be limited to the distance between the two shorts, which might be a foot or two, or let's say it's a yard, 3 feet, because each of these cords is, I think, 18 inches, and so if I extend them in opposite directions, that's a full yard between them. And that's not what I'm looking for. I think what I'm experiencing inside my physiology is the suppression. I hate to say this because I'm, stretching myself out on a limb by speculating, but the sensations in my legs, hours after I stop using this for a few hours, leads me to believe that the fungus candida overgrowth in my legs is coming back. In other words, I don't notice it when it leaves, when I connect these contacts to the sole of my feet, specifically the ball of my foot behind the toes, right in the middle of the ball, which would be equivalent to this spot right here in the middle of, not in the middle of the palm, but up towards the right underneath the connection point of the fingers, in this case, toes in the case of my feet. The K1 spot, the kidney meridian spot. I don't notice anything except a kind of relief, but it's kind of a generic, vague sense. But it's if I do this for more than an hour, like 2-3 hours, let's say. Hours later, or immediately later, I'm feeling the sensation in my legs that is very uncomfortable. It's like as if something is oozing, literally oozing back into my legs, returning. It's like an oozing sensation. It's not comfortable because it's lymphatic. There's something going on in the lymphatic drainage that's not nice. Now, I know from prior experience that my candida overgrowth has been getting worse progressively over the years and decades. And there was a time when it was amber colored, which is what lymphatic fluid is supposed to look like tree sap. But then it reached a coloration and texture akin to a spoiling potato. If you put a potato in a cupboard, a warm kitchen cupboard, and let it sit there, eventually it's going to spoil. And what's going to happen is the fluids are going to ooze out of that potato. I mean, this is what happened to me, to my potatoes. There were russets. A white, frothy ooze starts to migrate its way out of the potato, very nice and gradual. And then I had a kitty cat who had been an alley cat before we took him in. He was very desperate to be taken in. He was like starving. He didn't care who took him in, just anybody. So I thought, well, nobody else in the apartment complex is paying attention. They're all at work. So the apartments are empty. So he was going to apartment in the alleyway underneath the windows, crying for somebody to take him in. So I thought, hell, I got nothing better to do, right? But, I didn't think he would have a problem getting along with my cats. They're so, once they get established in a routine, they don't want a newcomer. Who are you? Upstaging us, our attention that we get from the master? Okay, whatever. So I took him in, and he was so hungry. He could eat bones, chew down chicken bones, and swallow them whole. He had been living, apparently, on bones in the alley that he was trying to survive. He was only about a year old. He was just a little guy, a little young guy. But I took him in, and he had a very strong jaw and very mouthy. He could gnaw on your hand and to show you what he felt about it. He was like a dog or a big cat. I saw a video. Denny Goodman had a video on his Facebook that he had shared from somebody else's, and it was a menagerie of these baby lions that people were fondling and they were hugging, and the little cats wanted a hug and snuggle up, but they would do things with their paws. They got big paws with claws, and they got fangs. They would mouth them. And this is what my cat would do. Well, one day he got really upset with me making a sudden movement towards him. It must have startled him. And he bit into my hand, the backside of my hand, and gouged out a hole on the backside that went clear through the skin to the tendons underneath. Now, I don't have a whole lot of flesh on my hands, so there's no separation between my skin and my tendons. And he went clear down to the bone and tendons. He didn't puncture any veins or arteries, thank goodness, but he did puncture the skin. And at first nothing happened. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I could see through, like a little window into my anatomy. But within half an hour or so, I got this oozing coming out of the hole of my hand, and it was painful. It was white and frothy. And this had never happened before. In the past, whenever I had an injury of this type, a non-bleeding injury, a puncture wound, I would get clear lymphatic fluid, but an amber colored coming out of my puncture wound, not white and frothy. And just because I happened to have, it was very fortuitous, a spoiling potato in the cupboard. I didn't have room in the fridge to put my potatoes. Normally I refrigerate everything, but I had it instead in the cupboard, and I didn't realize how wrong it is. I knew it was wrong, but I could see it was spoiling. Well, that's what was happening to my body. My body was spoiling progressively over the years because of the candida overgrowth in the lymphatic drainage. Okay? So, this is what I think is happening when I take this circuit off my body. The the lymphatic drainage, or off my legs, the lymphatic drainage returns to its prior state of being totally engulfed by an overgrowth of candida in the lymphatic drainage itself. And in the past, I always hooked up the circuit to my body, and I was isolated from anything else because I had no grounding sheet, and let alone connected to the earth outside. So there was no grounding sheet to short out my two connection points on my body. I simply had an earthing pillowcase and an earthing mini bed pad at the foot of my bed, and so I used those as my interfaces, not these round silver discs. And I used those as my interfaces between the head and the foot of my body, and sometimes I would reverse polarity of the connection of the circuit. Well, now I didn't want to give up my earthing connection, my earthing bed sheet. And I also had a different bed, because this was a year ago. I didn't have this bed. I had a twin, and just a normal bed, normal sheets, and I wasn't trying to earth. Because when I first moved in here, we had a smart meter on the building, and I grounded myself immediately, because I had been grounded to a conifer, it must have been a 100-foot tall conifer, up in the Cascade Forest, rainforest of Washington State, and I was just blissful, and the tree was like 75 yards away from the house and any other building, so I had no problem with interference from people's neutral connection of their AC wiring in their home to the earth, interfering with my bliss. So I had a great time. But here we had a smart meter on the building, and I was lazy. I didn't bother to run a wire out the window. I just connected the earth ground of my earthing bed sheet to my twin sheet, because I had a twin bed, to the neutral connection, or the grounding connection on the socket, on the outlet, on the wall. And that, of course, goes to neutral, the house neutral, which is involved with our AC circuitry directly to the earth. But it's grounded to the earth, but it's there. And so there's an AC hum, residual AC hum in the grounding wire of our house wiring. But, and that's the kicker, is that wasn't the only thing going on. There's also residual attenuation of voltage related to the smart meter. And not just our smart meter, but everybody else's in the neighborhood to a lesser degree, but ours in particular. And I'd never dealt with smart meters before. I'd heard of them vaguely, but up until that point, I never had to deal with one. Well, that was the first instance I had to deal with one, and I went nuts. I couldn't stand living here. Everybody was psychotic, in my opinion, and I just left and lived in my DC-powered electric car. And if I left the ignition on all night long and parked in a parking lot away from all buildings, I was safe, because I was immersed in a DC field surrounding my body by way of the circuitry, the wires going through the car. And I slept sound as a baby. I just slept so good. But when I came back to here, I went nuts, because I was making direct contact through my earthing bed sheet on the twin bed I had here to the smart meter outside. And it took me several months to figure it out. I have to get rid of that smart meter no matter what it takes. And I literally, it took a lot of doing to get rid of it, because there was some hesitancy on the part of my landlord, but there was also hesitancy on the part of the electric company. They didn't want to have it removed either. So it literally took a certain amount of intimidation to get rid of it. But finally, the landlord got around to doing it, and then the electric company made excuses. Oh, we came with the wrong meter. We'll come back later, and they didn't come back until I intimidated them, and then they came back very promptly and swapped it out for an electromechanical watt-hour meter, which is what we have to this day, and they come out and read the meter manually. Well, that was a godsend. That made all the difference. And it took a while for me to trust bringing back earthing, because I couldn't, I was so upset from the prior experience, I didn't even want to try to earth at all. Not even using a separate line to, apart from the house wiring to go to the earthing ground outside. I didn't want to do anything. I was so upset over that experience. It was so upsetting, because I'm an electrosensitive person. And to have direct contact with the smart meter attached to the building that you're living in, it is awful. It's horrible. It's the most horrible, disorienting experience I could imagine. I thought I knew what horrible was. That was horrible. I was just freaking out. So now I'm grounded on this nice earthing bed sheet with its own separate line to a grounding rod, which I did not bother to go to a tree away from the building. I just went straight down the building. I'm on the second story to a grounding rod immersed in the soil directly underneath my building, or underneath my window here, which is where the wire is going out to. It goes behind my computer, so I don't avoid other appliances. You know, very lazy. I've been very lazy once I got here. I just haven't wanted to bother to take the effort to do much of anything. But I did something different this time when I re-instigated the use of this, owing to, and I got to give her credit, Faith O'Hara, for getting me interested in restarting my use of this circuit, what I call the sleep circuit, but without changing my grounding situation. Now, if you read Cooperative Healing of Leon Ernest Demon, he said he tried sleeping on or laying on a copper sheet, a copper mesh sheet, and it didn't do any good. You don't get the results you get with biocircuitry, because with biocircuitry, you don't use an earthing bed sheet at all, because it didn't exist in his day. You know, this is 100 years ago that he was researching his biocircuitry, his cooperative healing, I should say. Nowadays, we call it biocircuitry. But I prefer to call it bionic, whatever. Forget it. Forget me. So, he found it only works if you take wires and connect specific parts of the body that have to do with chakras. He didn't call them chakras, but I know that's what they are. And I won't get into why. Well, I will. It has to do with the fetus and how it develops. It creates polarization of voltage gradient differences between different areas of the body, and that's what grows and develops the limbs and the torso and the head and the tail, are the voltage differences among them all that create an energy field of differences, of voltage differences, and that becomes the energy map to which the body grows in those directions, the different parts of the body. The body creates the energy map first, and then the physical body grows in to fill in that energy space that has been defined by the voltage energy that's being generated by the very single cell that had been fertilized by mommy and daddy. And it somehow projects a field that gradually becomes more and more differentiated. So initially, when the cells are subdividing, there's no differentiation, but once they start to specialize, they create a voltage map within themselves, and they just create more of a voltage difference among themselves. Well, the biocircuitry of a relaxation circuitry setup, or connection point orientation, connecting opposite polarities, equalizes those opposites and takes us back to the bliss of our conception. And that's why it's so blissful, because we re-experience not our birth, but our conception. And that gave me the awareness that, or the recognition of that, we are conceived in bliss. And once we get past the painful portion of the death process, the death of the physical body, we re-experience that bliss of our non-physical existence, because there's nothing blissful about our physical existence. I mean, we have to be like yogis to experience any semblance of what we experience in the heavenly plane. And that's why yoga is appealing, because we want to experience heaven on earth, not wait till we're dead to experience it. But the biocircuitry of Leon Ernest Demon, of a relaxation circuit of Leon Ernest Demon, gives us that glimpse of what it's like to experience heaven at the time of our conception, when we have no differentiation, no voltage mapping, no differentiation between voltage polarities within our physiology. We're literally a singularity of voltage gradient, and there is no gradient because we're a singularity of voltage. So that's blissful, because there's no differentiation, there's no polarization. Now, why am I going through this? Because that's the bliss of biocircuitry. Okay, so he figured out that it only works if you connect very specific chakras of the body, the limbs, the two arms, the two legs, and in my experience, the two ears and the throat and the tailbone, the tail of the spine. And that created bliss when I connected those specific points. But when you lay down on an earthing bed sheet, it creates this ambiguous, ambiguity to the chakras. And so the principle of bio-circuitry is neutralized. And instead, we take our earthing bed sheet and connect it to earth. This is a totally different oriented style of circuitry, which of course yields its own specific benefits. But it's not related at all to bio-circuitry. It neutralizes bio-circuitry and bypasses it. And instead, we get the benefit of connecting our body via a single wire to the earth, and the communication via that single wire that affords us. Well, why am I bringing him up? Because the principle of shorting out opposites, voltage opposites, in a relaxation circuit. So, what I've done this time differently, that is so much better than what I did a year ago, that caused me to get tired of this. Literally, because it's a battery-oriented circuit. You know, bio-circuitry, even a bio-circuit of Leon and Steeman, you can't do it forever, because a relaxation circuit turns into a tension circuit if you take it too long. So there's a question of moderation. Well, in this situation, there's a question of amperage. Any amperage is no good. And so I encourage you to put in as much resistance as you can. The more the better. Anything you put in is going to be good, but if you can put in more, all the better. Yet, no matter how much we put in, it's never good enough, because it's a very unnatural situation, and all you have to do is short out the two terminals of a battery, no resistors, just the battery, and you'll see the battery heats up and will probably explode in your face. It shows that a battery-oriented circuit is anything but normal according to the physiology, and Becker told us what the physiology is in his book, The Body Electric. He said it's not electrolytic, it's not conductive, it's a semiconductor. And it's an intelligent semiconductor at that, in which it decides how it's going to behave, just like a computer decides how it's going to behave across the sea of semiconductors that are inside the motherboard, inside the mother chip, the main chip, the CPU chip, within the motherboard of our computer. And that's the way our physiology operates. And so this is anything but an analogous duplication of the physiology, and that's why it screws us if we overindulge our use of this circuitry. It helps healing and regeneration, according to his research, specifically in certain chapters, in particular, Chapter 7, Chapter 8, Chapter 12, 11, and 10, I think, possibly 9. He gets into other topics, that surround his main theme. But in certain chapters he focuses in on his theme of his use of electricity to help the body heal and regenerate. The problem is, we're screwed if we use this 24/7. It's unnatural. It's not body-friendly. So how do we make it body-friendly? Well, we put in as much resistance as possible. So I put in 6.6 giga-ohms. It's not good enough. My body is so sensitive that over time I've realized there's something wrong with it, and that's why I stopped using it. Well, there's a trick to making an improvement, and that's an earthing bed sheet. Get rid of the earthing situation that I had before, in which I had a non-earthing bed, and I had an earthing pillowcase and an earthing mini bed pad, creating direct connection to the body. Get rid of that situation in your mind, and instead just go back to one big, oblivious, ambiguous earthing bed sheet, in which there's no specific contact points to the body. It's all one, spread out across one face of your body. Now, if you put a earthing top sheet on, such that you have connection to the body both beneath you as well as above you, even better. Okay? So what we do now, and this is what I'm going to do next, I'm just describing it to you before I do it, because you're not going to be able to see it once I do it, so I might as well just describe it right now. Let me back up so we can get a good view. of the entire bed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the circuit underneath the bed somewhere, let's say the foot of the bed, or it could be off to the one side. And I got a lot of jumper cables, and hopefully I'll have enough, because this is a big bed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create 4 contact points. I'm going to split off each of the two, the positive and the negative, into 2 parallel connected contacts. So I'm going to have 2 positives and 2 negatives, and each pair is going to be parallel connected to each other. So it's like one is the extension of the other. They're going to be equivalent. And I'm going to put I'm going to put similar polarities diagonally across. So I'm going to put, let's say, a positive at this corner of the bed and positive at that corner, negative at that corner, and negative at that corner. For some reason, my intuition is telling me that's the way I should create the connection. I want to connect the circuit to the bed sheet, not to my body. And I want the connection points spread as far apart as possible, if possible greater than the distance of my body, rather than less. You know, the lazy way, nothing about this circuit works if you're lazy. You've got to go to the trouble to make it work and work as best as possible. So you got to put in as much resistance as you can. But then when it comes to shorting, you don't want to create a short that's the length of the circuit board, you know. I could just run a shorting wire from one wire to the other right here, embedded in the circuit. Wouldn't that be easy? But it's a shortcut not worth doing. The short I envision has to cover the entire spread of distance greater than my physiology, greater than the body, at least the same as the body, if not greater. Let's put it that way. So if I could do a 100-yard short across a 100-yard wide grounding surface, such as the earth outside, I would do that. I'd lay down and sleep on the bare earth with my bare skin body, and I'd have what I want. But of course, I'm not doing that. I'm living in a nice, controlled environment, my bedroom. So I get out the bed sheet, the earthing bed sheet, I put it on, I ground it to the earth, which is fine and dandy. That's a separate consideration, that the voltage potential now of the circuit attached to the earthing bed sheet is the same voltage ground plane voltage as the ground plane of the earth outside. But that's not good enough. That's just for starters. The next point is to connect the circuit to the earthing bed sheet itself at its 2 far corners along a diagonal. And so what I've done is I've put the circuit down at the foot of the bed underneath on the floor, and I've connected one connection. I've come up here and I've done it to the top corner. Okay, so I've put the connector, since I have both the mattress is a grounding mattress surface as well as the bed sheet above it, I chose to face the silver contact downwards to make contact with the mattress, not with the sheet. And then I put the other one, I ran a wire all the way to the far corner for the opposite connection of the circuit, and I placed likewise the similar over at that corner. So I have it's either positive here and negative there, or vice versa. I don't know, and I don't care. So now I'm shorting on a diagonal this way through the earthing mattress, and in all likelihood through the bed sheet. The problem is that the way the wires run, they run up and down like this, and then they're connected at least at the top, and probably at the bottom as well. So what's actually doing is not this, because this is not a mesh arrangement like prior designs of earthing bed sheets. This is all one way, and in this case it's parallel to the vertical of the body. So I don't know what I'm doing actually in terms of spread. You know, what is the actual pathway across the earthing bed sheet? I don't know, and I don't care to know. All I know is all the wires across the bed sheet have to be connected together to make a ground plane of sorts of the whole bedding plane that we're laying on. So in some manner of speaking, they're all connected, and it's going to work its way across the bed sheet from one end to the other, regardless of what direction orientation you're looking at. But it's going to be more complicated than that. But whatever it is, it's generally doing that. And so by my making connection at one corner here and an opposite on a diagonal corner over there, it's going to end up getting across somehow. So now it's going through the bed sheet and through the mattress, not through my body. And I always wondered about this, but only because I managed to put in lots of resistors does it start to make sense, because now I've shorted out all the amperage. The remaining amperage that my resistors couldn't resist, the excess, the leftover amperage, 200 picoamps, is now going through the bed sheet for the most part. Let's say 98-99% of it, because it's taking the path of least resistance. My skin is offering additional resistance, as well as the tissues, the inner tissues of my body. Not too much, but I think it's around 500 ohms internal resistance. The skin, though, can be as a minimum of like 1,000 ohms on up to like 100,000. It varies. So anywhere between 1,000 and 100,000 ohms. And so, plus, I'm not forcing the current of the circuit to go through my body, so it's going to take the path of least resistance and go through the bedding, the earthing bedding material. Yet, that's only the amperage that's shorted out, not the voltage. If I have this correct, somebody correct me if I have it wrong. But it's only the amperage that's getting shorted. And this is something nobody tells us when they talk about shorts. It's the current in the circuit that shorts the voltage between the two terminals of your power source. But a short added into the circuit only shorts the amperage and not the voltage. So since the circuit is already designed to have reduced amperage and nothing, I don't touch the voltage. As a sidebar, side effect, yeah, the voltage gets reduced a little bit when you add a resistor, but not a whole lot. So it's somewhere in the vicinity of what it was originally coming out of that battery. So it's somewhere in the vicinity of 1.5 to 1.6 volts. So I'm only shorting the amperage because it's the amperage that's flowing, not the voltage. The voltage simply tells you what characteristic there was of the battery before you connected it to a circuit. What was the voltage difference between the two terminals on that battery when it's a fresh battery? And when it goes dead, the voltage difference reduces. But you're not shorting the voltage. The circuit no, it's the membrane inside the dry cell battery dividing one cell from the other, because there's two cells in there. One is the positive cell and one is the negative cell. It's the membrane between them that is literally acting as a non-short, as an insulator, to prevent leakage between the two cells. Otherwise, the battery would be dead. So you have to have a membrane in there, and this is very important. So, but the membrane, all it does is prevent an amperage short, not a voltage short. But if that membrane were not there, and the battery was internally shorting its amperage, it's the amperage which would then short the voltage difference between the two by running down the voltage and causing you to have a dead battery. So it's a little more complicated, but it's good to know this, because when you're fashioning a circuit and a short that's designed to produce certain results, hey, you got to know this stuff. And I never knew this, but now I'm beginning to figure it out. So we reduce the amperage severely by putting in lots of resistance, and then we create a short, but the distance has to be very large to maintain a nice spread between the two poles of the circuit, so that I can get a voltage gradient across the sheet. Okay? And I want that voltage gradient to be at least as wide as my body, if not wider, or as long as my body, if not longer. And since it's on a diagonal and we don't know what exactly is going on, it'll serve my purposes, probably A-OK, probably good enough. So now I'm shorting out the amperage that's left remaining, the 200 picoamps that's left remaining, and that's going through the path of least resistance along the silver wires of the bedding, the earthing bedding material, instead of going through my body. But I still have the voltage gradient that I've established with the help of the circuit, and that's all that's important. The only thing that anything mattered in Becker's circuit was to keep the voltage in a reasonable level, and 1.5 volts is 10 times more than what the body produces, and I do that specifically for a reason, so that I can establish a voltage coming from the circuit that the body will notice. Because if it's the same or worse, less than the body's voltage level, it's not going to notice the circuit. So it's like going to be invisible. So I want to make it slightly more than the body, but not too much more. So I decided on just using a 1.5 volt AA battery without modification to its voltage level, so that would be around 10 times greater than what the body is putting out. As measured by a meter in my bathtub, I measured how much current was going through my body, through the bath water that had salt in it, through my body and through the circuit, or through the meter, I should say. And it turned out to be that a 1.5 volt battery, it puts out a voltage spread around 10 times greater than my body can put out from head to foot. So I'm creating a voltage gradient in the earthing material, and that's all we need to do. But we have to suppress the amperage in the circuit and then short out the remainder through the bedding, and so that we're left with strictly voltage alone. And this is what Tesla dealt with when he was trying to create radiant energy. He ended up creating a circuit that was high voltage, high frequency, and 0 amperage. And we're doing the same thing in simpler terms, because we're not dealing with high voltage, we're not dealing with alternating current, and so it's a lot easier for us. But we're doing the same thing. And when we connect our earthing equipment via a single wire to our grounding rod outside, we are doing something also similarly, because radiant energy, when it's transferred, can be transferred along a single wire. It does not need a return wire. And so our connection to the earth is filtering out current. Yet what's left remaining is voltage. Nothing else. And any radiant energy which might be in there as well. So we're creating a filter by having a single wire go to the earth, to our earthing equipment. It's cool. We're actually doing, in simple terms, what Tesla was doing in a much more sophisticated manner, because, we got machines and they are greedy for power. And the body doesn't need a whole lot. It just needs intelligence. So this is what we're doing. We're trying to construct something that's very intelligent, because it's strictly oriented to voltage and amperage is not included. And if there's any radiant energy, it's probably in there, but it's not going to have amperage get in the way. And that's the problem with amperage. It tends to get in the way of all these more subtle energies that we're dealing with, or the subtle intelligence of voltage alone, of voltage signals. And the complexity of voltage signals, it's literally a symphony of variation of voltage signals in our body and in the earth. And so that's all we're attenuating ourselves towards. Not attenuating, what's the word? Entraining ourselves towards is simply radiant energy and voltage, and that's it. And the voltage is mild, and the amperage is non-existent. So it's perfect. Now, I did the lazy approach. I am lazy-oriented. I just did 2 connections, one here and one at the opposite end. I didn't do what I described earlier, so it's only because I'm lazy, I guess, and also because I wanted things to be balanced. If I did the connections the way that I described before, it wouldn't be balanced due to the resistance of the wires that I'm using to extend the circuit across the underside of this bed. So I decided to do it this way, and if I decided to expand the connections to 4 connections to include this diagonal point and that diagonal point. I don't know, I'll just have to think up what to do. But I want balance because I don't want to favor one connection over the other due to a longer wire, and that's literally what I have. I have a short wire going from the circuit at the foot of the bed coming up to this point, but I have a much longer wire going to there. And it's not too much difference in resistance, a little bit. It's subtle. So I've already got an imbalance simply because I didn't use the same number of jumper cables, alligator clip jumper cables, between one side of the circuit and the other. I could have, and I might do that. I might when I finish this video, I might reconnect things to make it the same number of jumper leads on either side, because I do want to keep balance to either side of the circuit. Let's see what else. So I haven't tried it yet. I've simply set it up, and I'll see how it works, but it shouldn't be much different than what I've been experiencing of late, connecting the soles of my feet and shorting it through the ankles and the legs, my legs, shorting out the circuit. It should be quite interesting. I don't know. We'll see. So the idea I started out this video is that voltage gradient apparently has something to do inversely proportional to, or the strength of a voltage gradient, or the strength of the polarization between the two between 2 points is inversely proportional to the ability for fungus to grow and prosper within the lymphatic fluids of the tissue system of the physiology. There's something about a voltage gradient that is antithetical to the flourishing ability of fungus, the ability of fungus to flourish and prosper. And that might be why, the only reason, or the main reason why, fungus and candida overgrowth has gotten worse in my body over the years, because I'm getting older. And the magnetic potential is getting less, the voltage potential is getting less. My physiology as an electrical system is simply running down. And so this might be why cancer is more prevalent, because the interior of a tumor is loaded with fungus and yeast, among other pathogens. But that's the greatest mass that enlarges the tumor is a mass of yeast that's literally blowing it up like a balloon. Yet it all started from a little tiny space within the tissue system, not in the bloodstream, because then you could have the white blood cells attacking the fungus, but in the space between 2 body cells in the tissue system, there's no white blood cells there. It's all been excluded. It's been retained within the bloodstream, the white blood cells, so they can't get at where the fungus is growing and prospering and putting down anchor, so to speak, setting down roots, where it matters most, in the tissue system, and that's where the cancer develops, not in the bloodstream. That's a different thing. That's coming out of the bone marrow, and then going into the bloodstream when the red blood cells are affected. But in most cancers, it's in the tissue system, because that's where pathogens can flourish, such as fungus, and not be attacked by white blood cells. So it's a problem. So when we're outside, walking on the bare earth, the earth has a voltage gradient. When we touch another human being, we put one hand one place, another hand somewhere else. Let's say we're massaging them or whatever, hugging them, there's a voltage gradient between those 2 places in which we touch them. There's a difference between those 2 places. But on an earthing bed sheet, it's basically a expanded wire, because it all concentrates down to a single wire. This whole bed sheet, king-size bed sheet, that whole surface area is really just a spread out. It's as if we took our grounding wire from the grounding rod outside, we brought it up here, and then we took a hammer and we flattened out the wire and spread out. If it was not stranded wire, if it was a solid core metallic structure, and we'd hammer it and flatten out that wire
really, really micro thin, like a molecule thickness, so that we could use that volume or mass to spread it out to the entire square area of our bedsheet area that we want to lay on. And then we just lay on that metallic sheet, which is basically the reformed geometry of the wire. So there's no grounding, there's no voltage gradient across it, there's no differences. But when we go outside, we know there's going to be, because we have a north pole and we have a south pole. Just the magnetic difference alone is going to indicate that there's going to be a voltage difference between those 2 points on the Earth. And so, scale down, when you walk barefoot on the Earth, every time you put down 1 foot, your other foot behind you, there's a voltage difference between them. Yet here, if I were to stand on this, there's no voltage difference between 1 point and another. But now that the circuit is in here, on opposite diagonal points, now I have a voltage difference between those 2 points. And now this is going to be more similar to the Earth in that respect. There's going to be differences. As to what are the differences, if that's 10 feet, let's say, on a diagonal, what's the difference between any 2 points on the Earth's surface, 10 feet apart spread? I don't know. But in any case, here, this might be accentuated, if anything. But here, at least we're doing something. We're creating some kind of diversity in voltage between any 2 points on the sheet. So it'll be more similar to the Earth in that respect. And that variety of voltage challenges the body. So that, let's say if you have your hand touching one area and your foot touching another area, the body's going, I've got to readjust, or I've got to deal with this. But if everything's the same, then what does that mean when everything's the same? Well, let's put it this way, it's not organic. It's as if, like I hate to bring this up, but it's an example, the first thing that comes to mind, Mao Zedong era, these what do they call it, the aesthetic rebellion, or they suppressed the arts, especially during the Mao Zedong era of China, communist China. They all wore the same uniforms, same wardrobe. Made it easy for manufacturing, but boy, it must have been boring to look at all the same clothing on everybody. It's kind of like that. It's when we create or worse. No, here's an example. In agriculture, monoculture. We just, we want to reforest an area that we cut down the trees, and we just choose one tree and we plant that, and they're in solid rows and columns, and that's not so nice either. But it's just one tree and that's it. It's like, what? It's a diversity. It's a biodiversity. Oh, the other stuff will come in. Yeah, not all of it will. Only certain ones will come back in. Many of the others won't. Unless we put it there. We took it away, we got to put it back. So it's kind of like that. It's when everything's the same, it's not really organic in the sense of what we're accustomed to, variety, the various interactions, the synergetic interactions among the various organisms. Well, when everything's the same voltage across the bedsheet, it's kind of a similar, analogous situation. So I thought I'd add that as a closing thought to why should we bother to do this? If we've already got an earthing bedsheet connected to the Earth, what's the point? We're blending two ideologies, so to speak, two conceptual ideologies, Becker's approach and the earthing people's approach. And there's a way to blend them, and this is what I'm doing. I'm blending the two. Without trying to. Effectively, it ends up being a blend without having tried to, because it's convenient. The earthing sheet is there. Why not make use of it? So this is different than what I did a year ago, and so this gives me cause to consider that this is an improvement over what I used to do. And it might, just might, be the minimum configuration to encourage me to keep it up. Because what I was doing up to a year ago was discouraging me to keep it up, and I stopped making use of Becker's circuit. And I wasn't even using grounding either, for that matter. But that's a different matter. I wasn't using grounding because of the smart meter. Really gave me a bad taste in my mouth, so to speak, for ever wanting to ground again. But I started to ground because the smart meter is not on our building anymore. And now I'm restarting the use of Becker's circuit as a sleep circuit, something to sleep on for many hours of the night, but only because I'm grounding out the amperage entirely, so that there's no amperage whatsoever left remaining in that circuit going through the body, because it's mostly all of it is going through the bed sheet itself, the remaining 200 picoamps. And I think that's a very significant thing. It may not seem like much, but to me, over time, when you do these things, over time, it can wear and tear down the body if there's something wrong. The wrong accumulates, and the body becomes more sensitive to it. Because I wasn't really electrosensitive in the very beginning, but over time I realized, in dealing with Leon Ernest Eamon's Bio-circuitry, I was creating sensitivity that wasn't there before, a consciousness of sensitivity that wasn't there before. It probably was there, I just wasn't aware of it. But now I'm much more succinctly aware of it, and so it conscientiously bothers me if there's anything wrong, and that means I have to develop the theory of how to use these things and evolve the theory to make it a little more sophisticated and a little more appropriate for the physiology. So that's what's going on here. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with Becker's circuit. It's just he was doing something different with it. He was emergency care. A few months, a few weeks, and that's it. And I'm doing it much longer than that. Although he did his 24/7, but it not for the kind of length of time that I want to do. Even though I don't do it 24/7, I just sleep on it. But still, it's and I don't have any. I'm not treating a wound. I'm treating the whole body. That's the other thing. The coverage is different. So, a few things are different, and I have to figure that into the equation, and that makes things a little more challenging. Anywho.